Let's talk about the value cliff in Dynasty for running back. Specifically, I have four names that I think are on the edge of a cliff potentially in terms of overall value. So these guys, if things go wrong, could lose all of their value or fall dramatically in rankings. So first, let's kick it off with Javonte Williams off the board as the RB21. Javonte Williams, the good. The case for why I should care or you should care about Javonte Williams, his target share over the last 3 seasons, 10%, 17% in a 4-game sample, and then a 13%. Javonte Williams is going to be utilized heavily when it comes to the passing game. That is going to be where he makes his money. That is the potential he has to potentially hit an elite level ceiling. Now, the other part of this, right, is Russell Wilson's gone, which I think is a bonus because I'm just not a fan of Russell Wilson whatsoever. I don't think many people are. And he's a year removed now from his knee injury. I think last year starting slow made a lot of sense because you're coming back from a catastrophic injury where most people predicted you weren't going to be ready until the middle of the season. So Javonte Williams struggling early on, I think that makes plenty of sense. All of this is right the good for Javonte. The bad, however, everything that could basically push him off this value cliff is, I think, a lot more damning than the positives here, right? If you look at what he's done over the last 3 seasons, over his first 3 seasons in the league, he was the RB26 in points per game. He was the RB30 in points per game. Now that's on a 4-game sample. And then he was the RB33 in points per game. Him being valued at RB21 is basically at this point just people holding on to hope, holding on to hype. And I get it to an extent, but on top of that, he's entering a contract year. A running back that has never really produced, has been, had a catastrophic injury to some extent, now has to hit the open market because I would be very surprised if Denver extends him. The chances of him being a workhorse in his second contract do not feel great right now because he hasn't proven he's worth being a workhorse running back in the NFL. We just haven't seen that. All around the entire scope of Javonte Williams is just really leaning more towards the negative than the positive. Now, if I'm a competing roster, am I fine to hold Javonte Williams? Absolutely. I think he could be an RB2 this year. I think, top 20 running back is a realistic outcome for Javonte. But long term, when he hits free agency, he's probably not even going to get like a Miles Sanders type deal. He may just be a handcuff or a 1B in an offense. And I think RB21 with the 2025 class coming in, we're going to see him drop further. So Javonte Williams, you want to hold while he's a contender, that's fine. Otherwise, though, I don't really see the appeal in holding on to him. Next up, let's talk about Josh Jacobs coming off the board as RB14 in the DLF startup ADP. There's a case here for him to stick at this value, and there's a case where he just continues to fall further and further, right? The good, though, let's start there. He has a massive improvement in offensive situation. Leaving the Raiders is probably one of the best things that could happen for him. Going from Jimmy Garoppolo and Aiden O'Connell to now playing with Jordan Love and Matt LaFleur as your head coach, there's probably not a bigger jump outside of Saquon Barkley in terms of offensive environment. He's going to keep that workhorse role that we've seen from him, right? Over the last couple of seasons, he's averaged 17.5 carries a game and 4 targets. That's a pace of 357 opportunities a season. When you talk about workhorse running backs, you don't see guys carry that type of workload consistently in today's NFL. Josh Jacobs got paid. I would be surprised if he's not used basically to the fullest extent early on in that contract, and that should be right in 2024. The bad is Josh Jacobs is 26 years old. He'll be 2027 going into next season. So even if he's great, given the age, he's not gaining value. There's no world where Josh Jacobs goes higher in startup ADP than he is this year, just because the age is always going to limit him. But that's not the only thing that could push him down boards. If you look at what he did in 2023, that does not inspire hope whatsoever. 3.45 yards a carry. So that's where if he doesn't bounce back fully or even 90% of the way to what we saw in 2022, Josh Jacobs could be outside of your top 20 running backs next year. And, basically people could be pounding the table for Marshawn Lloyd to overtake Josh Jacobs. So if you have him as a contender, I get why you're holding him because the upside there is very obvious this season. But long term, he is a very dangerous asset to hold. Moving on to running back number 3, it's Kenneth Walker going off the board as RB11. And I know Addison just called him out as a pivot trade target, which I think makes perfect sense. And a main reason I'm talking about him here in this, value cliff episode. So the good, the bad, let's break them both down. The good is obviously Kenneth Walker's a good running back. At face value, when you watch him, he looks like a good running back. He is incredibly difficult to bring down, right? Last season, he forced 72 missed tackles. That is near the top of the NFL. The man is an absolute terror. And what he does with that is basically turn them into long breakaway runs. He's 15th and 3rd over the last 2 years in breakaway runs among qualified running backs. So at only 24 years old, there is so much tread left on those tires. And he's not like Javonte Williams. He has 2 years left on the contract. Like, he is not about to hit free agency. He is going to continue to stick in this offense and probably be utilized as one of the, rushing heavy running backs in the NFL. All of that is great. But on the flip side, he's still paired with Zach Charbonnet, right? And Charbonnet got round 2 draft capital last year. Zach Charbonnet took usage away from Kenneth Walker, particularly in the pass game, right? Back-to-back seasons, Kenneth Walker sat right around 7% in terms of target share. That is going to limit the ceiling. You need to be seeing 10 to 15% if you want to be an elite running back. So at RB11, he is going to be heavily reliant on touchdowns and breakaway runs, which is a dangerous game to play unless you're Devon Achane, I think. Like, that's the truth. And over the last 2 seasons, he has finished with 13.3 points per game and 13.5 points per game. We have not seen an elite ceiling from Kenneth Walker on a week-to-week basis. He has been a mid-level RB2. So when you're valuing him up at RB11, like, this is why Addison is comfortable pivoting off of him. And I think so am I, because look, the talent's great, but when you're splitting work and you're not producing back-to-back seasons, that can get very dangerous in terms of the value, right? If he puts up another 13 points per game, he's not going to be valued at RB11. Like, he's going to fall dramatically. So if you're holding Kenneth Walker, he's the one here. Like, even as a contender, I am cashing out on Kenneth Walker. I am listening to what Addison said in his pivot video, and that's what I'm going to roll with. And to close us out, we have the big one, right? Well, at least what I think is one of the big ones. Saquon Barkley, valued as the RB7 in startups right now. And I get it. The pro Saquon Barkley case is obvious. He's out of the New York Giants, where he averaged 16.9 points per game over the last 2 years, which is exceptional given the environment he was in. And he gets placed in Philadelphia. That is, it feels like the best case scenario. And just to top it all off, he gets paid. You don't pay him that much money to not utilize him. Again, that 15 and 17% target share each of the last 2 seasons is going to stick. Like, that is going to be there. Look at what DeAndre Swift did last year. You could see that on steroids for Saquon Barkley. But he's still going to be 27 this year. He'll be 28 heading into 2025. So if you're not a contender, there is absolutely no reason to be holding Saquon Barkley, especially when you can be selling him at these prices. That's really the whole argument. As a contender, hold him, utilize him, go win a title. But if you are not a legitimate contender, the cliff is coming for Saquon Barkley. Whether it's this year or next, it will happen. So sell Saquon if you're not trying to win a title this season.